welcome back. One of our challenges as parents is that we have dreams for our children. Sometimes we dream about what we as children did not get to enjoy. And sometimes we dream about what our aspirations are going to be for this child. When I was growing up, I had a friend, we'll call him Richard. Now, Richard's parents always wanted him to be a good Jewish doctor. Throughout elementary school and high school, they were always telling him about how he has to do well, he has to succeed, he has to ensure that he can get into the top medical school. And so he did very well. He did well in high school. He did well in his undergraduate degree. And then he started medical school. First year, second year, third year. He calls me up. He says, you know, 3 of my friends already committed suicide. I can't continue this. I said to him, Richard, don't you want to be a doctor? He said, no. I said, what do you mean, all these years? He said, yeah, all these years my parents wanted me to be a doctor. I don't want to be a doctor. He had 2 years left to medical school, and he dropped out. The story doesn't end there. I get a phone call from Richard. He says, you know, I'm dating a girl, and I think I want to marry her. I say, that's great, Mazal Tov, it should go well for you. He says, yeah, but I just broke up with her. I say, okay, I'm sorry to hear that. Why? He says, well, my parents met her, and they don't like her, so they insisted we break up. I'm silent. I listen. He says, what do you think? I said, I never met her. How could I have an opinion? Richard says, well, maybe you should. I said, if you think, you know, how long can I meet her? How could I have an opinion? But what don't your parents like about her? Now, the unfortunate part about this story is that it's true and accurate. And Richard tells me, well, my parents think she's not good looking enough for me. I said, Richard, what do you think about her? He said, I think she's great, and I want to marry her. So I said, if that's the case, Richard, if you want, I'll meet her. I'm not sure what my opinion can be worth. But if you want my opinion, fine. To make a long story short, the story does have a happy ending. I met the girl, and I called Richard up, and I said, you know, I don't know what I can say after a short meeting a person once, but I was impressed. She seems like a nice person. Richard got married to that girl and built a beautiful life together with her. But one of the things Richard had to do was break out of the mold that his parents had created for him. Parents are sometimes unwittingly creating a mold for their child. And what we discussed in the previous times we met was our responsibility to match our chinuch specifically to the child, not to make the child match up to our expectations. Oh, there are bare minimum expectations that are legitimate, and we'll get to that soon. But we have to focus our chinuch to who the child is and be very aware of what his strengths are. There's a famous violinist here in Israel named Daniel Ahaviel. He's one of the top violinists. And the truth is that he never thought to be a violinist until his younger brother, who was handicapped, was undergoing music therapy. And then he went along, and as his brother was getting the therapy, he caught on. The music teachers were so impressed, they called the parents and said, you know, he has talent. And here the parents did what was right. They said, if he has talent, let's help him explore that talent. And thanks to them, we have one of the greatest violinists today, Daniel Ahaviel. So our job as parents is to be aware of who our children are and help them develop their strengths, help them discover their strengths, and be careful not to force them to live our dreams. Now, there's a basic formula that is very helpful for us as parents. We have to ask ourselves when we make decisions or when we try to push an agenda, who am I thinking about when I'm pushing this agenda? In whose interest is this? Now, when we started, we began with the Gemara that tells us, Shlosha shutafin ba'adam. There are three partners in the formation of man. There's the father, the mother, and obviously, first and foremost, there is Hashem. So when we approach a child, we have to factor in four beings, right? There's Hashem, there is the child, and then there are the father and the mother. So let's begin with Hashem. It's a good starting point. As parents, we play a huge role as to how the child is going to connect with Hashem, with his Creator. He looks at us and he sees. There's a famous story about a child who was asked, what's more important, Shabbos or money? And the child said, obviously money. So the parents were shocked. And they asked him, why do you say that? And the child said, well, simple. If I turn on a light on Shabbos, you guys say, no, Avrami, you shouldn't do that. But if I, God forbid, break something, break a dish, oh boy, do you get upset. So obviously money is more important than Shabbos. Children receive messages from us. They receive messages from how we behave. And we have to be aware that we are forming their perspective on Hashem, their perspective on religion, their perspective on the connection with Hashem. So our role vis-a-vis their relationship with Hashem is, first of all, to be good role models. If every time we go to shul we say, oy vey, boy is it hard to go to shul. Oh, I'd much rather stay in bed. I wish there were a later minyan in this town. What message are we giving the kid? So we as parents have a job. We help the children have a frame of reference, what their relationship with Hashem is. Children look up to their parents, and children emulate the parents' relationship with Hashem. But we're also responsible for educating them about their relationship with Hashem. Very often when a couple decides where to live, they factor in where they can make a living, what education they have for their kids. Well, you know, there are many parents who go in the reverse order. They say, what education can I get for my children? And what job I can get? Well, maybe I'll take a longer commute, because at the end of the day, the investment in the children's education is pivotal. Investment in education is a question of what school can I send to, and who are the neighbors going to be? Many years ago, there was a rabbi who was sitting Shiva. And as he was sitting Shiva, a woman came in to visit him. And she was dressed very immodestly. And all the rabbis sitting there, you could see they were all like pulling their chairs back. And she walks in and she says the words of consolation, Hamakom Yenachem Otcha, and leaves. And the rabbi felt bad that people were like pulling back their chairs just because she walked into their room. He said to them, you know, there goes one of the most pious people I ever met. So everyone in the room was surprised. What? So the rabbi said, let me tell you, she and her husband, he has a job where he has to work long hours. And his job involves questions of life and death. And so he has to work on Shabbos too. He works in a hospital. And when they had a child, so they would travel. She would come with the child and spend the Shabbos next to the hospital where he worked. Well, the child grew up to age 3, 4, 5, and suddenly she came to her husband and said, you know, I value the Shabbosos we spend together, but the child isn't getting to go to shul on Shabbos. You can't go to shul because you're working saving lives, and the child is now at an age where he has to go to shul on Shabbos. And so the one day a week when they were supposed to have time together on Shabbos, well, on that day she said to her husband, I think that for the next year or two, until things settle down, I think that I should be spending Shabbos by my parents, so that my parents, my father, can take our son to shul, and our son will learn what it means to daven in shul on Shabbos. So here you have a woman who, what she understands is that she has a role to educate her child about the connection with Hashem, to educate her child to daven in shul. And so she puts that first and foremost on her list. So she tells her husband, on Shabbosos, I think we should do that. And they did that for a number of years. What the Rav was insinuating was, don't look externally at the person. The person might not know about what modest dress is, but the person does know that they have a responsibility to educate their kids. And the person, that woman, is a tzaddikus because she's doing the best she can when it comes to her mitzvah. So again, we said as parents, we have a job to educate our kids about their relationship with Hashem. They will learn from the way we behave about mitzvot, the way we talk about mitzvot, the way we daven, the way we approach shul. And then we have the direct education, our responsibility to ensure that they get a good Torah education, that they go to a good shul, that they daven. That's direct education. So we said 3 partners in the creation of man, 4 to consider when we speak about the child. Hashem, next is the child. And that brings us back to the point we started with. If we want a formula to help guide us when we have to make decisions, and sometimes it's a decision, am I going to yell at the child? Am I going to be upset with the child? So there's a very important formula. Ask yourself, why am I doing this? Is it for the child or is it for external reasons? I think that many of the mistakes we make as parents is because we are not working with that formula. Take, for example, a parent that doesn't have enough time to spend with the child. He feels guilty. She feels guilty. So they say, let me buy the child another gift. Let me splurge and take the child out for pizza twice a week. Are you doing what's good for the child? Or are you doing what's good to placate your guilty conscience? Sometimes a parent feels guilty because they yelled at the kid and the kid didn't deserve it. Are they going to do what's good for the child now? Or are they going to do what's good for themselves? We have to ask ourselves, and this is a great formula, why am I doing this? Is this for the child? Parents sometimes send the kid to an Ivy League school. They're sending him to the top school. Why? Is it so that I can tell the neighbors, I sent my kid to the top school? Or is it because it's really good for the kid? So we as parents have to stop. We said there are 4 components to consider. Hashem, we discussed. The child. The child means what's good for him. Now, we have to also discuss what's good for us as parents. But when it comes to what's good for the child, we have to expand a little bit, and we will expand Be'ezrat Hashem next time in our discussion of understanding what a child needs at different ages. For now, let's continue for a minute because there's an important balance in the consideration of what's good for the child. Very often, parents think that the calculation ends there, Hashem and the child. And that's wrong. We as parents have rights too, and it's very important that we remember that. Take bedtime. Children don't want to go to bed. Sometimes they need to go to bed because they need to have strength the next morning. Sometimes they need to go to bed because the parents need to have strength the next morning. We don't have to feel guilty if we're pushing something because it's good for us. We live in this house too. The child doesn't run the show. So when we say that we have to ask ourselves, am I doing this for the child or for myself? That doesn't mean I'm not allowed to do anything that's good for me. I'm entitled to. I live in this house too. Being a parent doesn't mean that I don't exist, that all I do is what's good for the child. I focus on doing what's good for the child, but sometimes the child also has to do what's good for me. And there's nothing wrong with that. I don't have to feel guilty about that. Let's review what we discussed today. We discussed the story of Richard going to medical school when he didn't really want to, and it ended up backfiring after all those years. The importance of a parent reading what is the child's strength? What does the child want? The importance of a parent stopping and thinking, am I forcing him to live out my dreams, or am I really understanding what he wants? We discussed the partners, the Ribbon Shalom, Hashem, the child, the father and the mother, our role as role models to the child in how we behave. The child who thinks money is more important than Shabbos because of the way his parents reacted about money and how they reacted about Shabbos. So there's that education that we do on the sidelines as the child is perceiving how we behave. And then there's direct education, our decision about where we educate the child, what community we bring the child up in. And those are pivotal decisions that we as parents make that will frame, that will fashion how the child grows up. So with regard to the relationship with Hashem, we have to give it top priority when we think about where we live and where we bring up the child. Then we discussed our responsibility to the child, thinking about what's good for the child, remembering that our job is to act out of concentration, what's good for him. We ended with an important balance that doing what's good for him doesn't mean totally eradicating our needs. We are responsible as well to remember what we need and take care of our needs. And that's legitimate and important. And at the end of the day, it'll breed a happy father, a happy mother, and happy children. Thank you very much.